What if every shiny car and new gadget was quietly keeping you broke and stressed? There's a question I want you to sit with for a moment before we start. Not a trick question, just an honest one. If you saw two men standing outside an office building, one driving away in a new BMW 5 Series, the other walking to the bus stop in clean, unremarkable clothes, which one would you assume has more money? Most people would say the man in the BMW, and statistically speaking, they'd probably be wrong, because here's what we rarely talk about openly. In the United States and across most of Western Europe, the people who look the most financially comfortable are often the ones carrying the heaviest financial weight. Not because they earn less. In many cases, they earn quite well, but because somewhere along the way, a very subtle and very expensive decision was made. A decision that most people don't even recognize as a decision. And that decision is what this video is about. Let me introduce you to someone. His name is Daniel. He's 29 years old. He lives in a mid-sized city, let's say somewhere like Columbus, Ohio, or Stuttgart, Germany. Daniel finished university at 23, spent a couple of years finding his footing, and by 27 he landed a solid role, a project coordinator position at a logistics company. It's not glamorous, but it's stable, and the salary is respectable. He earns $62,000 a year before tax. In Germany, his equivalent earns roughly 48,000 euros gross. On paper, Daniel is doing well, better than a lot of people his age. He has his own apartment, he drives a decent car, he goes out with colleagues on Fridays, he takes 1 or 2 short trips per year. His LinkedIn profile looks like someone who's figured things out. But if you sat down with Daniel and looked at his bank account at the end of the month, not his paycheck, his bank account, you'd see something very different from what his life suggests. Most months, Daniel has between $180 and $300 left after everything is paid. Not saved, just left over. And Daniel is not unusual. Daniel is actually quite common. Let's look at his numbers, not to judge them, just to understand them. $62,000 a year after federal and state taxes, Social Security, and Medicare leaves Daniel with roughly $4,050 per month in take-home pay. Now here's where the money goes. His apartment, a 1-bedroom in a decent part of town, runs $1,150 per month. That's actually below average for many U.S. cities right now. So Daniel is being reasonably sensible there. His car payment is $487 per month. He bought a 3-year-old Audi A4 18 months ago, financed over 60 months at a 7.2% interest rate. The sticker price was $28,500. Car insurance on that vehicle, $194 per month. Because it's a financed car, he's required to carry full comprehensive coverage. Fuel, approximately $140 per month. So the car, in total, costs Daniel $821 every single month. Continuing, his student loan repayment is $310 per month. He has about $24,000 remaining on a balance he's been paying down since graduation. Groceries and household basics, $320 per month. That's reasonable. Utilities and internet, $145. Phone plan, $85. Streaming services, gym membership, small recurring subscriptions, $97. And then there's his credit card. Daniel carries a revolving balance of about $4,800 across 2 cards. The minimum combined payment is $144 per month, but he usually pays $200 to feel like he's making progress. That brings Daniel's committed monthly outflow to approximately $3,028, which leaves him $1,022 before anything else. Dining out, clothing, social events, travel, gifts, and any unexpected expense. By the end of a typical month, most of that is gone too. He doesn't live recklessly. He doesn't buy watches or designer clothing. He just lives. A normal, modern, socially calibrated life. And at the end of it, he saves almost nothing. Now, looking at that breakdown, most people would scan for the obvious problem, and they'd probably land on the car. And they wouldn't be entirely wrong. But the deeper issue isn't the car itself. People need transportation. That's not the point. The issue is the specific logic Daniel used when he chose that car. When Daniel walked into the dealership 18 months ago, he wasn't thinking about total cost of ownership. He wasn't running numbers on what $821 a month compounding into an investment account would look like over a decade. He was thinking about how he would feel driving that car, how he would look pulling into the office parking parking lot, whether his colleagues would notice. None of those thoughts were conscious. That's the important thing to understand. Daniel didn't sit down and deliberately think, I'm going to spend money to impress people. Nobody thinks that, but that logic was operating under the surface, quietly shaping the decision. And the car industry, along with the credit industry that finances it, understands this completely. It's not a secret. It's the entire business model. When a dealership tells you your monthly payment is $487, they're not asking you to evaluate a $28,500 purchase. They're asking you to evaluate a $487 per month feeling. And $487 sounds manageable. It sounds like a responsible adult with a decent salary can handle. What they're not showing you is the full picture. That over 60 months at that interest rate, Daniel will pay back roughly $32,200 for a car that by the time the loan ends will be worth somewhere around $14,000 to $16,000. He will spend more than twice the eventual value of the asset to own it, and for most of the ownership period, the car is technically the bank's asset, not his. This is not a scandal. It's not illegal. It's just the structure. And most people move through it without ever examining it clearly. So why does this keep happening? Why do otherwise intelligent, educated people like Daniel, consistently make financial decisions that work against their long-term stability? The answer isn't stupidity, and it isn't weakness of character. It comes down to a few deeply rooted psychological mechanisms that are, in many ways, completely rational responses to the environment we live in. The first is social comparison. Human beings are wired to assess their status relative to those around them. This isn't vanity. It's evolutionary. In earlier social structures, relative status had direct implications for survival and cooperation. That wiring didn't disappear when we moved into offices and apartment complexes. It just redirected itself towards modern signals: the car, the apartment, the clothing, the restaurant you post on a Saturday night. The second mechanism is called present bias. We are neurologically predisposed to value immediate, concrete rewards over abstract future benefits. $487 a month feels real and manageable. The $40,000 you might have accumulated in an index fund over 10 years if you'd chosen differently feels theoretical, distant, optional. The third, and perhaps most underappreciated, is what psychologists sometimes call identity-based spending. At some point, and this often happens during a salary increase or a professional milestone, people begin to construct an identity around a certain lifestyle. And once that lifestyle becomes part of how they see themselves and how they believe others see them, scaling it back stops feeling like a financial choice. It starts feeling like a loss of self. Daniel doesn't keep the Audi because he ran the numbers and concluded it made sense. He keeps it because getting rid of it now for something cheaper and more financially sensible would feel like admitting something he's not ready to admit. That psychological cost, that invisible emotional switching cost, is part of what keeps millions of people locked inside financial patterns that quietly drain them year after year. Let's step back now and look at what this actually costs Daniel, not just this month, but across time, because the real price of these decisions isn't visible in any single monthly statement. It accumulates slowly, and it becomes visible only when it's already done most of its damage. Daniel is 29. Let's assume he continues this general pattern, not getting worse, but not meaningfully changing either, until he's 39, a decade. In that decade, he carries an average car payment of around $450 per month, some years higher, some slightly lower, because when one loan ends, the habit often just transfers to the next vehicle. That's $54,000 in car payments over 10 years. Now here's the comparison that matters. If Daniel had instead purchased a reliable used car for $9,000 in cash, a 3- or 4-year-old Toyota Camry or a Honda Accord, the kind of vehicle that routinely runs for 200,000 miles, and taken that same $450 per month and invested it consistently into a low-cost index fund with a historically average annual return of 7%, where would he be at 39? After 10 years, at 7% average annual growth, that $450 per month becomes approximately $78,000, not including any lump sum additions, not including any salary increases that get redirected. Just $450 a month, consistently invested, for 10 years. The difference between those two outcomes, the Audi path and the index fund path, is not $54,000. It's closer to $78,000 because the invested money was also growing while it was sitting there. And that gap doesn't include what that $78,000 would continue to grow into if left untouched through his 40s and 50s. This is the actual price of the decision, not the monthly payment, the opportunity cost. The wealth that never got built because the money was committed elsewhere to a depreciating asset in exchange for a feeling. No one at the dealership will tell you this, not because they're dishonest, but because it's genuinely not their job. It's yours, and it's worth knowing. The car is the most visible part of Daniel's situation, but it's not the only layer. His credit card balance, that $4,800 spread across 2 cards, is doing something quieter but equally corrosive. At an average APR of around 22%, which is roughly the current average for revolving credit card debt in the United States, Daniel is paying approximately $88 per month in interest alone, some months more. He's paying $200 toward the cards, which means about $88 of that goes directly to interest. It doesn't reduce his balance at all. Only $112 is actually making a dent. At that rate, without adding any new charges, it would take Daniel over 4 years to clear that balance, and in that time, he would pay roughly $1,800 to $2,000 purely in interest for things he bought, in many cases, years ago, things he may not even remember buying. This is the invisible architecture of modern consumer spending. It's designed with extraordinary precision to feel manageable and to remain permanent. The minimum payment structure on credit cards is one of the most quietly effective wealth transfer mechanisms ever built. Not illegal, not hidden, just poorly understood by most of the people using the product. And in Europe, while the consumer credit landscape has different regulations and slightly lower average APRs in some countries, the behavioral pattern is largely the same. The mechanism differs. The psychology doesn't. Now I want to shift the frame slightly, because this video isn't about fear, and it's not about making Daniel or anyone watching this feel like they've failed. It's about how financially intelligent people actually think about these decisions, not hypothetically, but practically in real life. And what you tend to find when you look at people who genuinely build wealth on middle-class incomes, not people who inherited it, not people who earned unusually high salaries, just people who accumulated real financial stability over time, is that they share a very specific orientation. They make the invisible visible. What that means practically is that before committing to any recurring monthly expense, especially a financed one, they convert it into its true total cost and its opportunity cost, not as an anxiety exercise, just as a habit of clarity. A $487 car payment isn't $487 to them. It's $29,220 over 5 years, plus interest, plus insurance, plus the foregone growth on that capital. That's the real number, and they look at the real number. They also tend to make a deliberate separation between what they can afford and what they choose to spend. These are not the same thing, and conflating them is one of the most common and expensive mistakes in personal finance. Daniel can afford the Audi. His salary supports the payment, but affording something and choosing it wisely are completely different evaluations. Financially intelligent people have also, in most cases, quietly decoupled their identity from their visible possessions, not because they're indifferent to quality of life. Many of them live very comfortably, but because they've worked through the logic and concluded that a car, specifically, is a poor vehicle for status in any meaningful sense. Vehicles depreciate. Status constructed on depreciation is structurally unstable. The people who actually have substantial net worth, the ones studied in research like The Millionaire Next Door, which documented the actual financial behaviors of wealthy Americans, are disproportionately people who spent modestly on visible status items and allocated aggressively toward assets that quietly grew. They didn't look rich. They became financially secure, and at some point, they stopped caring much about the distinction. I want to be careful here, because this video is not financial advice, and the right path for any individual depends on their specific circumstances, tax situation, income, and goals. But let's stay with Daniel for a moment, just to make the abstract concrete. Daniel's situation, as described, is not catastrophic. He's not in a debt spiral. He's not missing payments. He's just not building anything. And at 29, time is actually his most valuable financial asset. The most meaningful change available to him isn't a budgeting app or a side hustle. It's a recalibration of one or two large fixed commitments. If his current auto loan term allows, and if he ran the actual math, he might find that when this loan ends, choosing a significantly less expensive vehicle, something reliable, fully paid in cash from savings, would free up $600 to $800 per month. Combined with paying down his credit cards aggressively in the meantime, he could realistically be in a meaningfully different financial position in 3 to 4 years. Not wealthy, not retired, just no longer treading water. That's the realistic, undramatic version of financial progress for most people. It doesn't make for an exciting headline, but it's what compound interest and reduced fixed obligations actually produce over time, quietly, without fanfare. The point of everything we've covered today isn't that cars are bad, or that credit is evil, or that enjoying your income is wrong. None of those things are the point. The point is that a very large number of people, genuinely hardworking, intelligent, reasonable people, are carrying a financial weight they never consciously chose to carry. They made a series of individually understandable decisions, each one reasonable in isolation, and those decisions stacked into a structure that quietly consumes the majority of what they earn. And the most expensive part of that structure is often not the dollar amount, it's the time. The years of potential accumulation that pass while the money is directed elsewhere. Looking financially comfortable and being financially secure are two very different things. And in a culture that constantly rewards the appearance of the first, it takes a certain amount of deliberate thought to actually pursue the second. Daniel's story doesn't have to continue the way it started. Neither does anyone else's. Awareness in finance isn't a minor thing. It's often the only thing that was missing. Subscribe.